Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Today, Tim and I are honored to be joined once again by author, IT leadership guru, and CEO of Hella Search Associates. You may know her from CIO.com or indeed the DEX Show, where she has previously appeared to give us one of our best loved and listened to episodes in our almost 2-year history. Gives me great pleasure to say welcome back to Martha Hella. Hi Martha, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Martha, there's a theme on the show at the moment, as you can imagine, where we're looking back on this recent era that a lot of people would call the Great Resignation, something that appears to be drawing to a close, and we're asking our guests, what was that? Given your very distinctive perspective from the top or off the top of the IT pyramid, it's something we can't resist asking you, of course. So what was it about, in your view, then, this era, and how did it impact CIOs specifically, both as leaders and as resources in their own right?
That's a terrific question, and I love the perspective of looking back and saying, what was all of that? And I think we're still probably a few years away from truly having the hindsight to understand how did the impact of COVID, including the Great Resignation and all the new ways of working, truly impact us. I think that's going to be an important question for a couple of years. From my perspective in IT, right, because what I work and think most about are IT leaders, both in terms of their own right as professionals, but also in terms of their ability to hire IT leaders. And I think the Great Resignation was certainly about many people taking stock of their lives and deciding what's important to them and how much they want to work, whether they need to work, right? How much they want to commute to work. And, you saw a lot of shifting views from that. And that's where you get, much of that Great Resignation from. But for CIOs, it really took a challenge that they already had and compounded it, made it more acute. So, finding, talented technologists who understand, software development or cloud computing or what have you at a deep level, but who can also have business acumen and build strong relationships and be good on that people side, that has always been a challenge. In fact, in my first book I wrote in 2012, I had a whole chapter on the fact that people just aren't made like that, where they're both deep technologists and also really excel at the softer side. So the Great Resignation just took an already very challenging supply-demand problem for CIOs in hiring these people and just made it a little bit harder. Whether or not when the Great Resignation truly does draw to a close, that's going to solve some of the challenges that CIOs have in hiring people, we'll see. But really, it's just been hard to hire these technologists for a long time. And I don't think COVID changed that much, except made it a little bit harder.
Sure. And I mean, we've spoken to kind of like mid-level leadership saying that, often they were being offered 2x salaries at other companies. The competition became insane. The remuneration rates went through the roof. Was it the same at the very upper echelon? I mean, you obviously Hella Search Associates is were you insanely busy during the last 2 years since we last spoke, with just CIOs moving constantly, the demand being incredibly high for them?
When COVID first hit in May, 2020, May 2020, I really didn't know what was going to happen with executive search, right? Was this going to be companies just deciding they didn't want to hire anybody for a while? And of course, it was completely the opposite of that, where we found that COVID caused a great spike in demand for technology leadership. So, what I would say is the way I sort of, assess why there was such a spike in our business and continues to be, is that, you had a lot of CEOs on the fence about should we really move to the cloud. And you had a lot of CIOs, for example, who didn't really have enough influence to champion a move to the cloud. Well, when CEOs saw how some companies fared who were already had a good cloud footprint, how they fared after or during COVID, and how the companies that didn't have the cloud footprint, they didn't do as well. Suddenly CEOs got on the cloud bandwagon. They got on the bandwagon for data and analytics because they didn't have what they needed in order to pivot their businesses during COVID the way they had to do so suddenly. And also for those CEOs who were holding out for saying our project, let's say, insurance policies, it's such a complex personal sale that we're making, it must be in person and we must have a handshake. Well, COVID really threw a wrench in that. So you found CEOs now saying, where's our cloud agenda? We need more digital products. We need more data and analytics. So COVID created a great spike in demand for CIOs and chief data officers and chief digital officers. That I think COVID was behind the spike in our business. And now, once CEOs have gotten on the bandwagon for a digital agenda, that's just a big multi-year program that's really, has found itself with a great deal of support. So I think COVID put a huge recognition in front of CEOs for what they need in data, digital, and cloud. Now they need those CIOs, and the CIOs need their teams to deliver on that agenda, regardless of what the next economic cycle holds.
Fascinating. I was actually going to ask you what the lasting legacy might be from this period, but I think you just preempted that question. Really,
but I'm going to answer that anyway, if you don't mind. The lasting legacy from this period, I believe, has been some real energy behind setting up our culture, our organizations, and our technology infrastructures for digital engagement technologies and for data and analytics. I see that as a critical, lasting legacy from this period.
And Martha, that's a good segue. So rather than continuing to look in the rearview mirror, let's gaze into maybe the crystal ball, or maybe it's a magic 8-ball looking forward. There's this degree of negative expectation around what happens next, especially when it comes to the economy. What are you seeing or hearing? What's the sense and anticipation among CIOs, first of all?
So, it depends, of course, on what industry. We work across industries, and everybody has their own version for why COVID brought us to this point, and now we're, thinking through our investment strategy for the next year. In general, I would say that CIOs are right there with their other executive colleagues, CFOs, COOs, and saying, we need to plan for a softer economy. We need to be careful of our costs. If we see some revenue downturn, we've got to make sure our expense management is there. So they're, just as bullish or bearish on the economy as their investors, their boards, and their fellow executives and their CEOs. So I don't see a great deal of difference in how they're sort of thinking through the future and planning for potentially a recession. But it has not put any downward pressure on their need to hire. Because what do you need in a really bullish economy where we're growing and growing and growing? Great technology and great data and great worker productivity. Yeah. What do we need in a down economy? We need great technology, we need great worker productivity, and we need great data and analytics. So they may be, from a business perspective, saying, hey, we've got to, maybe scale back our expectations for growth in Europe, or we've got to maybe rethink opening that new line of business right now. But when it comes to pushing on a technology agenda, including hiring the people to drive that forward, I do not see any softening in the IT tower right now.
And do you think the CIOs, you described two different kinds of businesses, those that kind of got caught flat-footed and those that were prepared. Do you see them almost exact opposites in terms of their planning and decision-making now? The flat-footed ones are maybe more aggressive right now, so they need to prepare. And the ones who were ahead of the curve are saying, you know what, we did well, let's protect it and not be so aggressive?
I think that's a great question, and I'd love to be able to sort of draw a line, because you had companies that were flat-footed And but it was an easy fix. They were flat-footed and they didn't have the policies that they
Right.
needed. Now they've got the policies. And then you've got some that were caught flat-footed because their entire culture is legacy technology and not putting a premium on technology. So I would say it's not so much, because we were flat-footed, here's what our outlook is for the economy going forward. I think it's, were we flat-footed because this was something that we missed? Or were we flat-footed because our entire culture is not one of innovation, is not one of
Right.
strategic planning? So if the reason for being flat-footed was a cultural issue, that where leaders have their heads in their sand about what's really happening with data and digital, then yeah, you're going to see a really good correlation between their ability to be ready for COVID and their ability to handle whatever economic trends are around the corner.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that no matter what category you fall into, the last two coming up on now with the economy issues coming up on 3 years, it's been challenging for everyone. But those challenging times bring the most opportunity for significant impact. An executive can make a big impact when there's trouble, right? And I'm sure you've seen some similar periods of uncertainty and challenge in your own career. What was the most illuminating for you in terms of showing the way leaders can best navigate and survive or even thrive through that uncertainty? What exactly did it show you?
Well, I love that question. It really has me thinking back, first of all, at how old I am, because I have so many options for different economic periods
I'm right there with you.
and seeing the impact. But, the dot-com boom and bust to me was a really fascinating time because you had all of this, what you would call, it was called that irrational exuberance, right? Where all you had to do was have like a funny name and an
Right.
exclamation point in your title, and you got huge investment dollars. And before you knew it, you were rich on paper. And then, 10 minutes later, you had nothing because of the dot-com bust. So the dot-com boom to bust, which, was way back 22 years ago, I think, that was a really good one to sort of develop leadership skills and understand what leadership means in down economies, because you had a lot of people, be successful executives of big Fortune 500 companies, and it's something that I call the OO blip, where you see on this resume this beautiful career trajectory with the right education and the right tenure, and then all of a sudden, what happened in OO? Right? In OO, somebody, left their big, comfortable career and moved into an exciting dot-com adventure, and that went bust, and then they had to kind of get their way back onto a different path. And I think what I really appreciated about what I saw about leadership during both of those periods, the boom and the bust, is that, to be a good leader also means taking chances and to bringing some risk into your own careers, into your companies, but it's got to be smart risk. And I saw a lot of seasoned executives really go and take some risk by being a part of a dot-com. And then when that went south, they brought what they learned and they brought some of that dot-com sensibility back into these older companies to help them become ready for what then was sort of a dot-com era and has now evolved into an era of digital and data analytics. And I just really loved what I saw then. It was a lot of people saying, there's something exciting happening right now. I want to have a great impact. I'm going to take a risk and do that. Some were successful, some weren't, but they all brought the learnings of their dot-com experience back into their Fortune 500 companies to bring some of that innovative DNA. I really loved, now we talked earlier about, when are we going to look back and say, well, what all was this Great Resignation? I think 22 years later, we can look back and say about the dot-com era that was frustrating for a lot of people, and the bust was very difficult. There were huge amounts of layoffs, but what we wound up with across the board is more innovative dot-com informed DNA in our companies. And that, to me, was a very positive legacy of what was a challenging period.
Yeah, that's great insight. There's another group of executives that we don't talk about all that much, but have influence even over the C-suite. I'm curious what your thoughts are about board members and what they're looking for from specifically from IT during these periods. Do they have a different view of technology as a board member, kind of outside looking in advisory role than a C-suite, or what are your thoughts about that?
I would say the three things that board members care most about when it comes to IT are security, security, and security.
Yep.
Information security now, when we do searches for chief information security officers for companies to be on leadership teams, of course we're looking for technical depth. Of course we're looking for a good track record of good information security programs. But one of the top criteria that we're looking for is their ability to speak to the board about information security and not to use a lot of, technology terms and tools and all of that, but to talk about information security in a business context and a finance context, because of course the language of the board, that lingua franca of the board, is finance. And so a chief information security officer's ability to wrap the security posture of the business in finance terms, that is something that boards are looking for. Boards, when it comes to IT, what boards are also looking for is transformation, because I don't want to go way off track here, but I just want to bring in this concept that we are now in a data economy. We did not set up our businesses to function in a data economy. We set up our businesses to function in an industrial economy, which is what we've had for the last several hundred years, but we don't anymore. And so designing our businesses to run like software businesses, or businesses whose product is data, which essentially is going to be every business at some point anyway, getting that business to run as a data business as opposed to a legacy industrial business, that is a huge effort and really relies on the concept of transformation. It's transformation in how we work. It's transformation in our technology paradigm. It's transformation in digital literacy and the way teams work together. So redesigning the enterprise to work in a data economy, who's going to do that? It's not going to be the CFO. They'll participate. The COO will participate, but the CIO is essentially the driver of that. So what boards are looking for from everybody on the board, including the CIO and most especially the CIO, is broad brush transformation skills. So I'd say information security, data, and transformation. That's probably what is on the minds of most board members today.
Good stuff.
And given, Martha, the sort of the context that you've described, where boards need security, they're also demanding, swift digital transformation, yet we are entering a period where budgets are going to be a bit tighter. Which investment areas do you expect to suffer, and what dangers are there from an investment perspective in trying to make savings in the wrong areas?
Well, the temptation will be to scale back on information security because we don't really get a positive return on an information security investment. But companies won't do it. They won't scale back because the threat of a real incident has such a negative impact on employees, on brand, that's an area they cannot skimp. I believe that it will be on some hiring, likely not in IT, but in other places. And I think where they will likely also scale back is those, going way back full circle in this dialogue, those CEOs who said during COVID, hey, we need digital products. We need a digital agenda. We can't, function during COVID without that. Those CEOs who anointed those digital agendas may be tempted to scale them back now. Those are extra things to do. Those are nice to haves. That's not our core, set of products and services. The issue there, of course, is the forces that engendered those digital investments haven't gone away. Just because we face a recession doesn't mean that that the digital products that we funded we don't still need. So my guess is that CEOs will scale back on some of their innovative agendas. And while that will seem initially like the right thing to do because those digital products and strategies are not core to what we do, if we don't make them core to what we do, we're going to be in big trouble in 2 or 3 years from now, regardless of the economy. So I believe the temptation will be to scale back on digital initiatives because they don't impact the bottom line immediately. But down the line, those CEOs are going to look back and say, oops, I wish we would have scaled back on something else because now we really wish we would have had the innovation in the digital space.
Well, let's hone in on a specific area, if we could. So one area that's been a big focus of investment through the Great Resignation has understandably been around, within IT, has been digital employee experience. Do you see this approach as something that becomes less relevant in this new economic context? Does the attempt to see things more from a user perspective help sharpen potentially the spending priorities, for example, in terms of empowering departments to make more intelligent decisions? Or is it something that almost inevitably will fall a little bit on the wayside for the reasons you've just articulated?
I believe that put it this way, the employee experience, the focus was on the employee experience long before COVID. We started to see new titles like Vice President of the Digital Workplace. We saw a lot of digital workplace titles, and those were to bring digital technologies to workers so they could have better collaborative experiences, so they could work more efficiently, get up to speed more quickly. So that happened before COVID. COVID put a real premium on the employee experience and a real monkey wrench in the employee experience because now the employee experience had to be rich and wonderful and remote, which, as you can, for all different kinds of jobs, makes that very challenging. Going forward, I believe that most companies, they may soften their investment to some degree in the employee experience just because they've got to reduce investments to some degree, for cost management imperatives based on the recession. But I don't see them pulling back on the employee experience overall, because when you have a digitally enabled user base, not only do you have retention, and in any economy, it costs a lot of money to lose people and then rehire, but also in a recession, that's when you need your employees to be their most productive and their most engaged and their most collaborative. So a recession supports continued investment in the employee experience, in the user experience, in employee engagement. Plus, in most forward-thinking IT organizations, you've got that design thinking, user experience basis for the development of new tools. That's pretty entrenched right now. I think it would be hard to unwind that, even if there were a cost management imperative to that.
Fascinating. So a final thing, we can't let you go without asking you about another trend over the last couple of years, Martha, and your no doubt unique perspective on it, which is that growing proximity we've seen between HR and IT. First of all, interested in your read on the phenomenon in general, but also interested on your sort of very, very kind of inside view of how CIOs have been embracing that proximity, that new working dynamic, or perhaps feeling challenged by it. How have they generally received this new dynamic, this new relationship?
It's interesting because HR and CIO for years, and IT, HR and IT for years were sort of in the same boat. Incredibly important functions, highly strategic, and yet sort of the second citizen of the executive committee. So IT and HR have always been kind of in the same boat. Anyway, and then more recently, for two reasons. One, the employee experience, which we've just talked about, and also this redesigning of the business so that it functions in a data economy. Both of those needs have created, a real driver behind the collaborative activity between HR and IT. So you see much more collaboration between HR and IT than we used to see. And this role of this IT business partner in HR has become incredibly important. I also see the title, I'm seeing more titles of chief of staff under the CIO, people responsible for all of the HR activities and strategies in the IT organization. So, you know, HR and IT really should have been close partners years and years ago. I think there are a lot of reasons that they haven't been. But right now, I don't see any negative impact from the recession or any of that on that relationship. I think that relationship is going to get stronger and stronger. And when you are talking about reaching across functions beyond IT as the CIO to create change. Let me just give an example. If you really want to do agile development at scale, IT cannot do agile alone. Agile necessitates commitment of resources and time from all different people across the business. It's very hard for IT to make that happen on their own. That's a cross-functional responsibility that IT has. They need their HR business partner to be able to create those cross-functional organizations like agile development. So, when the business becomes technology, when the business becomes software, business becomes data, which we're seeing in every single company, that means IT cannot belong to one department and one leader. IT needs to be a shared sport. Digital is a shared sport, a team sport. CIOs can't drive all of that learning and the adoption of all of those new ways of working across the entire business without any help. And the HR-IT business partner, that is their job, is to help push the CIO's people agenda across the enterprise. So I think I'm glad to see so much more collaboration. I hear the enthusiasm for that collaboration in the market, and I think it has to and will continue.
Martha, there might not be anybody else in the industry I enjoy listening to more than yourself.
Oh, you say that to everybody.
Well, I say it in public. So this is going in the episode. I'm going on record. It's been a real pleasure to have you back on the show. And I heard you allude at the top of the conversation, actually, to your book, The CIO Paradox, which I really recommend everybody takes a look at. Really enjoyed researching and reading preparing for our last podcast, which I will link to in the show notes, both the book and the previous discussion.
Wonderful.
And, look, anybody interested in hearing more about the themes and topics we've covered today, please do head over to our the DEX Show DEX Hub mothership, as I like to call it, for more insights such as these. Once again, Martha, thanks so much for coming back. We hope to see you for a third time sometime in the future, and all best.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.